partner Gareth last week, but sadly he missed it because his big 3-0 was London. Wish him a happy birthday again and give him a little thrill. But I knew that was from Andrew to Gareth. I just wish a happy birthday to our darling Nick Rossi, who's 15 today, like the Shields family. And I'm going to really quickly get on to it because Ali Moore, you're very lucky to have me yet again this afternoon sharing in your drive. Are you ready? 8.5 hours and 40 seconds. What do you mean? We're going to that next phase of stage 4. I was in oblivion there for a moment, Ali, but you pulled me back into reality. We're going to look at preparations for that. Also, a big focus on childcare with some announcements today. And what are you doing? Maybe getting married, getting in just before. After 3:30 today, filling in for our next segment right now. It's time for some new headlines at 3:30 with Jim Graham.
And good afternoon. A permit system will be introduced in Victoria today. Premier Daniel Andrews says that working parents can help anyone else on childcare. It comes as the state reported its worst day of the pandemic, with 15 deaths and 725 new infections. The start of the Victorian inquiry into virtual quarantine will be delayed in Melbourne. More than 20,000 people have been placed in hotel quarantine in Victoria. On the US East Coast by a tropical storm made landfall yesterday as a hurricane in North Carolina. 2 people died when the storm spun off a tornado that struck a mobile farm. Authorities say 2 others were killed by falling trees toppled by the storm, and another person died when their vehicle was overtaken by water and swept downstream. A shower or 2 in Melbourne. The next news is at 4 o'clock.
ABC Radio Melbourne Traffic.
Good afternoon, Simon Tackler from the Australian Traffic Network. A collision in Hallam on the Princes Highway at Daycourt Drive. On the Eastern Freeway, outbound delays due to roadworks blocking the left lane at the Tram Road entry. The diesel spill from earlier in Sunshine West, Bevan Road remains restricted between Boundary and Somerville Road. Delays on the Hume Freeway outbound due to works after Cooper Street. Tower works in Truganina wrapping up Sayers Road at Palmers Road. If you see anything on the roads, call us on 1300 222 774. That's the latest Melbourne traffic.
You're listening to ABC Radio Melbourne. Hello and welcome to Drive this Wednesday afternoon. Ali Moore with you, filling in for Ras, who will be back in the chair tomorrow. How are you? 8.5 hours to go. It's a little bit less before the new restrictions kick in. Are you ready? You had the lawn mown, maybe you've been and had a haircut. Maybe you've got married. A little later you'll meet a couple who have done just that. They haven't done it yet, but they're about to. They are virtually standing at the altar as we speak. What about work? Do you know what you'll be doing tomorrow? And the kids, unclear on whether you'll be able to get them. Look at that. The questions heading into this phase of stage 4 restrictions. How ready are you? 1300 222 774. One thing is very clear though, and that's why we need to stay home. Here's the Premier giving the latest update a little earlier today.
That's 725 more than our last update. I'm very sorry to have to report that the total number of fatalities due to this global pandemic is now 162 Victorians. That is 15 more since our last update. 1 male in his 30s, 3 males and 1 female in their 70s, 3 males, 3 females in their 80s, 3 males, 1 female in their 90s. Of those 15 cases, 12 can be linked to aged care.
And Andrew's giving his daily update earlier. From midnight tonight, you will need a permit to be out and about going to work if you are a permitted worker. You'll also need a permit to access childcare.
There will be many families who will not be able to access childcare as they normally would. and that is essential to driving down movement, to driving down these numbers. If you are a permitted worker, regardless of whether you are working in person or you are working from home, and you attest that there is no one else in your household that can look after your children, then you will be able, with that very simple permit, to access childcare.
Childcare, it's a big issue for people today with the announcement of just how that new system is going to work. Also, the announcement we'll look at in just a moment of the federal government providing some more assistance. But if you don't access childcare, or you won't be able to access childcare, what about getting a babysitter, or maybe asking the grandparents if they can come and help? Are you able to do that? Here's the Premier's answer to that question.
On the issue of people coming into your home and providing everything from babysitting to childcare, the Chief Health Officer is examining those matters, and we'll provide clarity as soon as we can later on today.
Well, there you go. That was about 12:30, maybe a little bit after this afternoon. We will bring you the latest on that as soon as we get it. A little bit of clarity, which many of you need, to find out just how much assistance you can get, particularly if you've got a little one under your feet and you're also trying to work particularly hard. Let us know how prepared you are. Maybe you're deciding that you're going to do something different this lockdown than what you did first lockdown. Maybe it's time to look at an entirely new thing to keep yourself entertained. Forget the sourdough baking. Maybe you're writing letters, maybe you're doing a bit of craft. Maybe, of course, you are looking after the kids. So childcare, a couple of announcements that were made today. I wonder whether you're clear on whether you'll be able to access it, and if you can't, you worry that you might have to pay for a service you won't be able to use. And if you actually run a childcare centre, how are you going to get through the next 6 weeks? From tonight, as you just heard the Premier say, you will need a second permit. Essentially, you're going to have to confirm that you've got no one else in the house who can look after the children. Also today, though, the federal government did announce some measures to help, including an extra 30 days of allowable absences across all Victorian centres, which anyone who has a child in childcare will know just how important that is. We're going to speak to Dan Tehan, the Federal Minister, a little later, but here's a bit of his press conference today where he addressed those extra resources for childcare operators over the next 6 weeks.
Services, on average, will be getting revenue based on the pre-COVID fortnight, on average between 80 to 85%. All up, we are providing a triple guarantee. For those parents who can't send their children to care, there'll be no cost to them. They'll be able to keep their child enrolled. For those early childhood educators, we continue to have the employment guarantee in place.
That was Dan Tehan, the Federal Education Minister, speaking earlier today. Interesting point. Parents shouldn't have to pay. The government is asking all childcare centres to waive the gap payment. But as Dan Tehan also made clear, and we'll talk to him about this a little later, the government can't compel centres to waive that fee. It can only give them enticements to do so and give them permission to do so. Shay Quirk is the centre manager of one of the largest early learning centres in Western Melbourne. Shay Quirk, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Where does stage 4 leave you?
So I think that it leaves all educators in a position of no guarantee of having a paid income for the next 6 weeks. Under the current arrangement, there's nothing that actually prevents sending down their educators without pay, and we've already seen this happen in the last 4 weeks across different providers, whether they're small or large. It doesn't differentiate between different employers. The educators have already been stood down. So although we've seen an increasing of funding for the providers and improved arrangements for families, there's actually been nothing put in place to ensure that the educators, so the actual people that do work on the front line, still have any income coming in. you know, across Western Melbourne and most of Melbourne and Mitchell Shire, you know, families started pulling their children out weeks ago, and now the government has imposed the stage 4 restrictions. So essentially they're shutting down the services for families to attend, which means that the educators aren't required, and we're going to have hundreds of thousands of women without work.
I had understood though, Shay, that the government assistance to centres, which comes in two parts. One is the so-called transition payment, which has been increased to 30% of pre-COVID revenue.
Yep.
Then you get the childcare subsidy of up to 55% for children that are enrolled. Isn't that on the basis that there is an employment guarantee that staff have to be
That's an
kept?
employment guarantee, so they have to be kept, but that's not saying that they can't be stood down without pay.
And you fear that that's what will happen?
That is what is happening. It's not what will happen, it's already happening. So I have a petition going. We have over 22,000 signatures from educators, providers, you know, a variety of people, but 22,000 people to reinstate JobKeeper for the sector. You know, providers don't have to keep giving them work. They're not to, I suppose, terminate their employment, but there's nothing stopping them not handing down the educators without pay.
So, Shay, what are you doing in your centre? And I should ask you, do you have any understanding at this point of just how many kids you're going to have?
So look, from my discussions, so not just at my centre, but with other industry colleagues, most centres have dropped by 80% occupancy. And in terms of families being eligible to attend, I have an ex-colleague who runs a centre that's a 120-place ELC, and they usually operate at capacity. Today they had 10 children.
So that was today. Tomorrow will be a very different story.
Yes, so as you go from 120 children to 10 children, you're essentially going from needing, say, 40 staff to needing 2.5.
So do you think that childcare centres will come out of this, but they won't have a workforce?
Oh, absolutely. The providers have been given, you know, a number of arrangements to support them during this. However, it's the educators, and I have stories of women not being able to feed their children. They've moved out of rental and back in with their parents. People not able to afford, you know, things like prescriptions. And another thing, we have 3-year-old kinder coming in soon, and there's been a real push for educators to upskill and to do their bachelor, and that's now being questioned. Why would we do that when this is how the sector is treated? So, you know, we're referred to as an essential service, and they're treated like third-class citizens. It's really traumatic. When the announcement was made today, I had so many phone calls, emails. You know, women, they couldn't talk because I don't know how I'm going to pay my phone bill next week, like it's due next week, and it's $64. Because they can apply for the job seeker, but as we know, that takes time. And if you have a job, you shouldn't have to apply for job seeker. We were initially eligible for the JobKeeper payment. Scott Morrison guaranteed that anyone eligible for that JobKeeper payment would receive that for 6 months, and then decided that
No, that was changed in your sector when extra assistance was brought in, and we will put the question to the federal minister, to Dan Tehan.
And that additional assistance was brought in to mitigate the loss of numbers from moving from free childcare to families now having to pay. So there's been nothing for educators that has come in to support them in the second wave, which is significantly worse than the first wave.
And Shay, when you say educators, a couple of texts here, you mean the childcare workers, don't you?
Yes, the actual workers, the people that are working on the floor every day. So it's not the centre managers. You know, they will have their role. It's not the area managers, it's not your operations managers and things like that. It is the women that work on the floor every day, the ones that have actually worked through, you know, June and most of July, when the JobKeeper was in place, and they were putting themselves out there. They're in their environment where social distancing is actually really difficult, putting themselves and their families at risk. And now with the second wave, the enrolments have dropped.
And do you think as under stage 4, because of course it's not, people still have to get a permit, not just to work, but a permit to access childcare.
That's right.
Do you think most childcare operators will have children or won't have children?
They will, but it will be dramatically reduced from what they would usually have. So numbers had already dropped before we hit stage 4. Numbers had dramatically dropped in a lot of, depending what suburb you're in, but Western Melbourne, a lot of numbers had already decreased. And so now going to stage 4, so we have an imposed restriction on the sector, and the government have not supported those workers that work face-to-face. They're the unsung heroes that Dan Tehan was talking about today, the educators on the floor, not the area managers, not the CEOs of the company that will make sure that their companies are viable. Don't worry about the educators. They'll still, like, the companies are still going to be there. Whereas these people, they might not be able to maintain their rental properties.
Right, and Shay, of course, the managers will have a very difficult time coming out the other side of this if they've got no one to work for them. Shay, thank you for joining us. And
thank you so much for having me.
Well, Shay Quirk there, Centre Manager of one of the largest early learning centres in Western Melbourne. 1300 222 774 is the number. I've got a text here saying that I've got no idea what will be happening with my children tomorrow. Both my husband and I have to work. We've got 3 young kids. We both work from home, but most people know that looking after 3 little people is a full-time job in itself. Indeed it is. My kids have been looked after by family up until now, but the babysitting rules for family hasn't been addressed. What on earth is happening? Indeed, we are told from the Premier's Department that the clarification on the babysitting rule will be coming out this afternoon. We would certainly hope so. Chris in Box Hill. Hi, Chris.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on your show. So my concern is that childcare restrictions will still have impact on the medical front line. I'm a doctor, my wife is a town planner, and if it's only restricted to both these parents being vital workers, then still it's going to have impact. I won't take emergency roster shifts, and I certainly won't fit in at the last minute, and I'm sure this is the same sentiment of other healthcare workers. So by only restricting it to both parents being vital workers, I think this is going to have real implications.
But that's actually not, I should say, Chris, that's not being made clear. When the Premier was actually asked about that, on the one hand, he made the point that there's going to be, that we need to get some more information, but he said what you have to verify to get a permit to use childcare is that no one else can do the job in your house. So that's a bit different to saying that you're both permitted workers, isn't it?
Okay, yeah. So, I'm still a little bit unclear if that means me or not. But I'm sure so many.
Yeah, but Chris, and I think maybe that might be clarified when we get the actual permit, which we haven't seen yet. Again, that will come out this afternoon. Which he says it's going to be a very easy process, but just what that clarification regarding your ability to get someone else to look after the children looks like, what you have to sign up to. Chris, on the other front, being a doctor, how are you going?
Yeah, look, I'm a neurologist, and there's people doing much more frontline work. Certainly I've seen the implications of the stresses or strains of the COVID situation on the inpatient environment at the moment. I think I have to say it's been remarkable to see the work ethic that people filling in for people who have been furloughed or the work ethic at the moment is really, really
Chris, being a doctor there, what do you think about the changes to childcare access and indeed going to affect you. If you're a childcare worker, obviously they're going to affect you quite significantly if you run a centre, or indeed if you need help. Just to re-clarify that point, if you like, the Premier was asked very clearly in his press conference whether both parents have to be permitted workers to access childcare, and he didn't really, well, he certainly didn't say that that was the case. He just said that you have to be able to confirm that there's no other adult in the house who could provide that care. Well, listening to that interview with Shay Quirk just a couple of minutes ago was Paul Mondo. He runs a childcare centre in Airport West. He's the president of the Australian Childcare Alliance. Paul, welcome to the program.
Hi, Ellie. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Is Shay's response indicative of what's happening in the border sector?
Look, I think the last 3 days have been really difficult for the sector in Victoria, in Melbourne Metro, and absorbing what has already been a horrendous year with lots of change. There is absolute heightened anxiety, and Shay's concerns and queries are not without some validity, but it's really important, I suppose, in understanding what's going on and what the obligations are for employers and how they should behave through this time is really quite critical. And I think that what we know and what we ask for from our employer with our employers when they're making this work, meeting this employment test, is that there's a level of commitment beyond that, the moral obligation to look after our workers through this really challenging time.
Well, you say that, but then Shay was talking about she already knows many people who have been stood down, and that while government assistance did come with an employment guarantee attached, that's very different to a guarantee that your staff will continue to be paid and not stood down.
I think one of the really important decisions here is it goes to the discussion around JobKeeper, and it's quite important to realise that about 40% of the early childhood workforce either didn't qualify for JobKeeper or their employers didn't qualify for JobKeeper. The arrangements in place, which is the now 30% transition payment, actually are for all services, including those who didn't qualify for JobKeeper. So if the employment test and the spirit of that test is met, therefore more educators will receive outcomes as a result of this process as compared to JobKeeper. Notwithstanding, I think this was announced today, the changes to people's conditions and what have you. I think there is an employment law test around what people can do as employers and what rights of employees are, and it is really, really important, of course, that people employers are acting in a legally compliant way and doing the right thing by their workforce.
Sure, but is there anything to stop them, Paul, if their numbers of enrolled children, if the number of children who turn up goes down to 1 or 2, and they've got 10 staff, they only need 1, is there anything to stop them standing down the other night?
Yeah, look, our advice to date has suggested that that's not possible to do because you're still operational in this particular context. But
why do you say it is happening?
Yeah, and again, I think this is the really important question, of course, is that we would expect all employers to act in a way that is legally compliant through this time, and that is really, really important, and that is not only legally right, but morally right.
Paul, how many childcare operators do you think are going to struggle to come out the other side, or are you confident that there is enough business that most centres will survive this if their staff don't?
Look, I have strong belief that the measures that are in place will ensure the survival of all services, and I don't know that there's any reason for fear. I think the changes that were made and announced by the federal government today were really, really important, and they do provide a lot of clarity, and they do provide clarity for families who will not be impacted by having to pay fees that services would have been legally obligated to collect for absence days, and they've added absence days to ensure services that families don't feel the need to withdraw their children through this time. So look, I think the measures in place are absolutely sufficient for the survival of those services through the next 6 weeks.
Let me ask you about that gap payment, though, that the government government has asked centres to waive, but the minister was really clear that he can't force centres to waive it. So will some parents end up paying for services they're not using or can't use according to the law?
I mean, I think a really practical scenario there is that there are two group of services, and if they are implementing this, and yes, the minister's right, it is up to the service to ultimately decide. But I would suspect the families, if they were faced that set of circumstances, that couldn't attend for the next 6 weeks, would just purely withdraw their enrolment, and that would have a double penalty on the service because they wouldn't be able to collect the childcare subsidy for those children who are absent through that window.
And just Mark, to explain to people the significance of increasing the number of absentee days, that essentially protects people from losing the assistance that they get for being, if they're absent for so many days, you lose that subsidy, don't you?
Absolutely. So the current arrangement is 42 days per year, and considering that resets at the beginning of July, by the time we get to the end of September, where a large number of families may not have attended, they would have exhausted those absence days, which means that later on in the year, when the child is sick, or when they need to take a holiday, or early next year in particular, they would have run out that, and they would have had to pay the full gap fee. So the impact of that is that some families are choosing to withdraw their children rather than use up their absence days for a discount. This arrangement means that the 30 days that have been added ensure that if a family is a full-time family that attends 5 days a week and is unable to attend for the next 6 weeks, they have the same amount of absence days at the end as they do now. So that's another 20 or 25 or so more that they would be able to use throughout the rest of the year.
And Paul, just a final very quick question. Have you, the Alliance or indeed the centre that you run, have you been given any notification about how you are, or to what extent you are responsible for policing this? So when people turn up at your gates tomorrow morning, if indeed they do, what do you have to do, and do you have the right to turn them away?
Oh, look, we acknowledge the difficulty of the Victorian government in providing advice around who can attend, when they can attend.